Hello, Mr. Samus from Belgrade, and welcome again to our podcast. And thank you for your time.
Hello, and thank you for invitation.
So we'll today speak about conflict between Ukraine and Russia. So, Mykhailo, I want to ask you, can you briefly give us your insights of last events on battlefield, please? It seems that Ukrainian armed forces has a successful counter-offensive toward Russian occupation. Yes, we can see 2 days ago what happened in Ukraine.
Yeah, right. Talking strategically, the main thing here that Ukrainian armed forces, they gain initiative. So if we're talking about the events on the battlefield, we look on the big map and look not only Kharkiv, eastern and northern direction on the Russian-Ukrainian front, but of course on the southern, I mean the Kherson, Platsdam, Donbass, and actually Kharkiv direction. And all of this time, I mean the last at least 2 months, Ukrainian commanders, they prepare in battlefield, they shape in battlefield for next counteroffensive and offensive operations. I'd like to say that what's happening now on Kharkiv direction, on the Kharkiv Oblast, it's a classical offensive operation. It's not even counteroffensive because Russians, they didn't expect this operation, and they didn't make some offensive operations there, and they didn't defend it in reality. So Ukrainian forces, they start their own offensive operations on Russian defense, and it was classical blitzkrieg, because actually for let's say 1 week they deliberate kind of 6,000 square kilometers, and it's fantastic. It's a phenomenon result, I think, in the modern history on the military science, I would say, and operational science. And what is interesting now as my estimation, that for Russian forces, for Russian commanders, is the main problem to decide, to define where will be the next Ukrainian counteroffensive or offensive operation, because Ukrainian forces continue the offensive operations on Kharkiv and Donbass now and Lugansk direction. Of course, not with so high tempo like before, like last week, because it's impossible, literally. But in the same time, of course, the Kherson Platsdam, Ukrainian forces continue to make counteroffensive operations there. And as we think that Ukrainian forces could prepare the similar offensive operations on Donbass and even Mariupol and Melitopol directions, the southern part of Donbass. So I think the main problem for Russians, it's the problem of choice, problem of to defining of the direction of next Ukrainian offensive operations.
What that can be, what place. So, based on your knowledge, what are the factors which contribute most in favor of Ukrainian side? Is it Western arms, or maybe military doctrine, or intelligence?
Yeah, I think it's everything. I mean, compared to Russians, we talked with you before in earlier programs that the main problem for Russians since 24th, when a decision was made about this so-called special military operations, it was bad intelligence, very bad intelligence, which obviously gave very bad information and data to commanders and, of course, the Kremlin. And after this, the bad conclusions, bad estimations, and based on these bad decisions. So making decision process, including intelligence, was very bad in all of stages. In Ukrainian side, we have opposite situation. I think that because Ukraine get pretty good intelligence before 24th and actually after 24th of February, especially with Western UAVs, not only Western, but for example, Turkish UAVs, of course, and Western satellites, Western electronic warfare intelligence, SIGINT, and Ukrainian human on the battlefield and tactical operational depth. I think the intelligence was a key element. If you're talking about the network-centric warfare, obviously it has several components. One of the intelligence, second commanders and the command and control system. And I would say that Ukrainian commanders showing very good and very quality ability to control situation and make a decision, which is absolutely important. Make a proper decisions, and of course the weapon. It's a third element. So if we're talking about network-centric warfare, it's a three element: the intelligence, target acquisition system, getting the targets, coordinates of targets, sending to commanders. Commanders made a decision and sending this information to effectors, weapons. And weapons destroying targets, actually. So, of course, in this situation, Western weapons such as HIMARS, MLRS HIMARS, MLRS M270, the modern artillery with high precision ammunition like Excalibur and other kinds from Germany, for example, or from other countries, I think, of course, they're playing a very important role. But I think at the same time, I would say that all of these components very, very important. So if we're talking about, okay, if you have only HIMARS without good intelligence, it's about nothing. So you cannot find the targets with HIMARS. Or for example, Ukraine got very effective anti-radar missiles HARM, which is playing critical role and game-changing on the battlefield, because Ukrainian forces now with these missiles could destroy Russian air defense on the battlefield, and it means that Ukrainian aviation could be using more free and more effective on the battlefield to support Ukrainian forces and to destroy Russian forces. But of course, again, to find the targets for these missiles for Ukrainian aviation, we need to have a very effective intelligence. So I would say that all of these components are very important. And if we planning to build modern and effective armed forces, I think we need to think about all of these components.
We have a lot of information that we can read and find, and there is a lot of talks about Russian weaknesses. What can be identified as major structural weaknesses?
I told a little bit about weaknesses, about the intelligence, about weak, let's say, making decision process, which is very important. And of course, I would say that doctrine is very old and ineffective. If you look at the, first of all, the first stage of the war after the 24th of February, March and April, when Russians trying to attack Kiev and northern of Ukraine, and after this escaped to Belarus, regrouping and trying to attack Donbass, you see that on Donbass especially, they used old Soviet doctrine trying to break through the strong Ukrainian defense. And it's very interesting that all of these territories, which is Ukraine now using these blitzkrieg tactics and very prepared battlefield, shaping battlefield, they occupied for a couple days. Russian forces trying to break through for months. And you remember these very long and very intensive operation by Russians using Second World War tactics with so-called firewall by artillery, using 60,000 rounds per day. It's absolutely unbelievable against Ukrainian defense forces. But in the same time, it was very ineffective. What they cause, it's now they have a problems and deficit with ammunition. They have a deficit with barrels for artillery because it was very intensive battles, and it's impossible for artillery to keep the tempo without changing barrels for artillery systems. And what else about Russians, about weakness? I think that the problem of Russian forces, it's leadership. I would say like negative, so-called system of negative forming of or negative preparation of Russian leaders and commanders in Putin regime. It means that not the most professional generals and officers were promoted, but because of supporting Putin personally, they put it on the top. And now the top generals in Russian leadership, they are not the best military commanders, but just the best supporters of Putin. And another side of this story, that Putin personally participating in defining the targets of operations and even conducting of operation itself. It means that all of these problems, which is of course will be saying that the generals they are stupid and they lost the situation and they didn't find that Ukrainian is preparing the huge blitzkrieg operation in Kharkiv area, but Putin, I'm sure, participating in this. And I would remind you that months ago, when Ukrainian forces prepared counteroffensive operations in Kherson area, Russian generals decided to put forces from Izium from the Kharkiv area. Some forces, I would say the most prepared forces, moved from Kharkiv area to Kherson area, which is now on the trap on the west side of the Dnieper River, and it's impossible to escape them under Ukrainian attack now. So they personally decided, I'm not sure who was the driver of this process, Putin personally or maybe generals, but they put the most prepared forces from Kharkiv area to Kherson area, and that's why Ukrainian forces saw this opportunity to gain this initiative and territory. So I think that all of these problems, and especially leadership, they prepared these reasons why Russians started to have these problems on battlefield. They cannot achieve the goals of the operations.
What is the next step of Russian? Do you expect maybe that the Russians can mobilize new amount of armies and brigades?
Yeah, the problems for Putin now, it's trying to define how react. The first reaction was launch missiles to Ukrainian civilian objects and electricity supplying system and heating supplying system. I think it was kind of checking of Ukrainian preparedness, how to react on this. I mean that Putin is trying to prepare for winter, how to destroy Ukrainian electricity and heating system, and I think it will be one of the most dangerous challenge for Ukraine and of course for Europe, because Europe will be cut of gas and energy as well by Putin. But if we're talking about the possible mobilization, for Putin, it's a problem because he started this so-called special military operations without call it war, and it was even punishment inside of Russia to call it war. So now, if you start mobilization, it means that you actually starting to call it war, and it means the changing of everything. Because Putin trying to show that's nothing happening, actually, it's something like very similar to Syrian campaign when Russia participated 3 years, 4 years, and nobody can actually say that Russia is participating in the war. It was one of the let's say trying by Putin to show that Russia is so strong country, they can attack any countries, any side in other part of the world, and you just don't mention that we are participating in the war. And now they need to adopt the new situation. It's obviously that they cannot find the proper personnel. I mean proper personnel. It means that officers and prepared soldiers, because it's not enough to find just for example guys in Chechnya or another region and send to the front. You need to prepare and train this guy to make into the soldier, sergeant, or of course officer. It's a long story, like several years, of course, to understand the tactical operational needs, how to use the systems, weapon system, etc. So I think that for Putin, it's literally too late to call mobilization, because if they call real mobilization, it needs several months to prepare, to train forces, to create new units, and of course to supply them proper armament, proper weapon, proper resources, uniform, etc. And it looks like Russia is not ready for this. So they can find soldiers. Russia is a big country, and of course it's not a problem to call for to rifle like 1 million people, but in the same time it's impossible to prepare 1 million soldiers. In these 1 million soldiers, you need to have 30% of officers and NCO, and of course it's impossible to make for 1 week or for 1 month. It should be several months. Obviously, I think Putin hoped that Ukraine wouldn't make this Kharkiv operation, and Putin wanted to frozen the front line before winter, and after this literally frozen Europe and Ukraine without gas and energy, and on spring press on Europe, press on Ukraine, and say that, okay, we're ready to sign some kind of Minsk agreement, free and to keep the situation like this. But you need to give us something from your side. But Ukrainian offensive on Kharkiv area now changes situation. It looks like before winter, Ukraine will conduct several operations more, and it means that for Russia, for Russians, it's a problem, because they need to decide where they get soldiers. I think that some forces inside of the Russian elites, especially so-called ultra patriotic, ultra conservative, the nationalists, they don't like what Putin is doing now. They like to make mobilization and start real war against Ukraine, because they understand if Putin continues this strategy, it means that it will be disaster, total disaster for Russia, and next year could be absolutely collapse of Russian state because of the sanctions. I remind you that on December this year will be apply a new total moratorium on Russian oil, and a little bit later Russian gas in Europe, and it means that the huge amount of money which is still sending by European Union to Russia will be cut. For Russia, it's not a good news, because at least they need to buy some, the Iranian UAV or technology from China. So they need money. They need money. Even they will be isolated in ruble zone, as they want this so-called dollarization of the economy. But anyway, I think that the dependence of the import of Russian economy will play very negative role in this situation. So I think that mobilization for Putin, it's kind of an unavoidable decision, but it's too late to be effective.
So I wanted to ask you about this everything that we talk. So what is your forecast towards future developments on front?
I think that the forecast is like Ukrainian forces of the Kharkiv operation will try to keep the strategic initiative and try to show Putin and to Russian commanders that Ukraine is ready to attack now on several directions. As I told, continue to attack on Kharkiv direction and Lugansk, to go to the flank of Donbas group of force of Russians. Attack, of course, on the Kherson Platform, which is now is, let's say, very actively preparing and shaping to destroy Russian group of force staying on the west side of the Dnieper River, and actually the Russian forces here on the trap, because Ukraine already destroyed all bridges across the Dnieper River, and it will be a very bad situation for Russian forces anyway. It will be absolutely crazy situation next week. And of course, Ukraine could show that they are ready to attack on Mariupol, Melitopol, to cut the land corridor from Russia to Crimea. And maybe Ukrainian forces will attack Crimean Bridge and showing, and maybe even Black Sea Fleet to destroy it, because Ukraine has already enough anti-ship missiles. So it could be like very complex approach, trying to use a strategic initiative and trying to, let's say, dancing, I would say, the dancing Russian generals, showing the different possible directions of attack, but anyway, it will be surprise for Russians. The main direction of Ukrainian next offensive operation.
So, if I understand good, are we entering a new episode of positional war on East? Yes.
Position? You mean position war?
Or yes, on East.
I'm not sure, because Ukrainian forces is going to continue attack, and if you look at the map, if you go in further across the Oskol River, it's to the east, it means that Russian forces staying on Donbas, they are under threat from Ukrainian forces if they cross the Oskol River and go to the east, and after this go to Lugansk, for example, because on Lugansk direction from the north, they don't have strong defensive positions and prepared defense from the engineer point of view. So Ukrainian forces could prepare another blitzkrieg operations here. Of course, if Russians they don't move the forces, the huge forces, to this area to protect Lugansk, for example. But the problem is where for Russians where get these reserves to put on to defend in Lugansk, because before this they didn't have any forces close to Lugansk, because the front line was just several hundred kilometers from Lugansk actually. So I'm not sure that will be positioned in war. I think that Ukrainian forces will try to move the front all time, trying to balance and change the situation. Do not allow Russians to fix the front line, and trying to use a strategic initiative to destroy front line.
Yes, because we can find that information that Russians go back to the Donbas region.
What I spoke?
Again, they back on the start to Donbas Russian army.
Yeah, they of course they trying to, of course they try to keep Donbas under control and send in forces there. But the problem is that Donbas it's only one area of the battle, and if they concentrate their forces on Donbas, it will be disaster for another areas occupied by Russians, especially on south. I told you that Mariupol, for example, and Melitopol looks very, very likely that Ukrainian forces will try to attack these areas, because it's if a success will get by Ukrainians, it will change situation even more than Kharkiv area, because it's cut Russian forces for Donbas group of force and southern part of group of force, and actually cut all of south from the supply from Crimea. And what I told, if this operation starts, I mean, to the southern direction to Melitopol and Mariupol, very probably that Ukraine will attack Crimean bridge to cut supplying to Crimea and to blockade Crimea, because actually Crimea will become an island. And in the situation when Black Sea Fleet will be the only instrument to supply Crimea with Russia, I think the Ukrainian forces will attack Black Sea Fleet with anti-ship missiles. So I think that it will be a very comprehensive, multi-layer offensive operation by Ukrainian forces using all of possible instruments. And of course, I hope that next packages from our NATO allies will include some long-range missiles which allow to do, for example, strikes for Crimean Bridge.
And for the end, I want Mr. Samus to ask you, by your all analysis, what kind of weapon Ukraine needs now in this situation?
Yeah. Talking about the threats, first of all, threats from Russians, and I repeat that I think that Putin will try to destroy all of energy, electricity supply, and heat and supply during the winter, before winter, trying to make the collapse of Ukrainian energy systems and to create a huge social problems for Ukrainian population. So the critical element here is air and missile defense, what we're talking about. And next weeks, we will have supplying NASAMS, anti-missiles, and air defense system, and German system IRIS T-SLM, very similar to NASAMS, which is very effective, especially for objects covering such as cities, electricity plants, and other objects. So I think that air defense and missile defense will be critical for Ukrainian defense now. And of course, the offensive operations needs some new instruments like long-range missiles, as I told, ATACMS, the continuing of supplying of HIMARS, MLRS missiles, HARM anti-radar missiles, which is very effective on the fighting with air defense, Russian air defense, and electronic warfare. And of course, we are talking about all of possible armor, the light armor and vehicles, and of course the negotiations about aviation, which we continue with Western allies. They should be focused on defining on the concrete type of jets, and I think it's not the, let's say, decision won't be found in this year. I think that it's a process for next year. So if we're talking about this winter, I would say about air and missile defense, and of course all of possible long-range precise weapon. I think which is changing the battlefield and giving Ukrainian forces capabilities to destroy command and control system, logistics supplying, command posts, air defense again, and all of Russian capabilities on battlefield on all of depth of the activities.
Mr. Samus, I want to tell you thank you very much for your time, because this is very important to listen from you what's going on now in Ukrainian, because you have directly information. We know your analysis is always excellent without any error. So thank you very much one more time, Mr. Samus.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. I would be happy to participate next time.